Hello and welcome everyone. My name is AdlerGG and this is the GamerzClass meta report for the patch 26C. In this video we will take a look at position 2 or the mid lane. Before we hop into the list of heroes, I want to talk a little bit about the current meta situation. So from my point of view, there is no broken mid lane hero or OP mid lane hero itself. So it's very hard to give a clean list of broken heroes. Another thing is that, in my opinion, if you play pub, cheese heroes are king. So basically, if you have last pick, the best options are cheesy picks like Broodmother, Meepyo, Lone Druid, Visage, Lycan, and Tinker, even Pugna to some extent. So cheese is king, but I don't want to talk about cheese picks in this video because they're usually always very strong. It doesn't really matter what meta is played. So we wanna talk about very stable picks that are really good in a competitive environment, and also if you want to play like straight up Dota compared to just cheesing your opponents with a last pick, because in 50% of the games you will not have last pick to pull off a cheese pick. So basically we want to take a look at very stable heroes that can be picked on the 9th pick rather than the 10th pick.
If you like this type of content, go to GamerzClass.com. For just $5 a month, get your replays analyzed, join monthly live sessions with pro players, get access to our entire content library, win prizes, and more with our supreme Dota 2 membership.
Ember Spirit is probably one of the most contested picks in the competitive scene at the moment. And this is because it can be laned very flexible. So usually you see it in the mid lane, but there's a lot of natural counters or heavy matchups, and then it just gets switched to the safe lane, and the safe lane carry will just play mid lane if the matchup is better. So please communicate with your team and make sure that you get a decent matchup. The general skill build is 0-4-4 or a 1-3-4 or 1-4-3. So basically you only skill chains if you need to rotate a lot, or if you have a position 4 player that rotates in and that allows you to play aggressive on the enemy mid laner. But usually we will see a 0-4-4 build. The item builds are also quite interesting in my opinion, because we have a lot of options. Usually you will see a Spirit Vessel Rush versus Huskar or Necro. So if there's any hero you need to bring down with healing capabilities, just go Vessel. If you play versus silences that could mess around with your game, go for Yule Scepter. If you want to farm and you need to carry the game, or you play against illusion based heroes like PL and Naga Siren, aim for Maelstrom. If you just want to run at people and keep fighting, go for Blade Mail. After one of these items, you usually opt for an Aghanim Scepter or a BKB if you need the BKB to stay alive in teamfights. The strength of the hero is that it's very low cooldown. It's basically always able to fight. Also, if the lane is a little bit rough or you get hard countered and you can't get a lane swap, don't worry. You can just put more points in Flame Guard and just push out the wave and keep killing jungle creeps. The sustain on Ember Spirit is also pretty strong because we can abuse Remnant and TP Scroll. So whenever we run out of region, we can simply put a Remnant at our current location and just TP back to base, refill our bottle and Remnant back. I think it's also safe to say that Ember Spirit has insane split push potential because it's a very elusive hero and we can build items to basically instantly clear waves like Maelstrom and Battle Fury. So it's very hard to deal with Ember Spirit split push, especially if you don't have any form of instant control because otherwise the Ember Spirit player can always remnant out. But the hero comes along with a lot of weaknesses. The laning stage is not that strong. We can easily get countered or get matchups that are very hard to play, like a Morphling. It's not the hardest late game scaling carry, because I think the hero itself is pretty squishy even if we have a lot of items. Doesn't have the best strength gain basically. And the sustained damage output is also not that high because we don't have the highest attack speed. So we basically only deal damage to enemies using Sleight of Fist. So it's very burst heavy, but the DPS is not high. It's very susceptible to instant crowd control, like silences or hexes and even roots, because roots will disable all our skills and silences will allow players to basically not let us remnant out, and the moment Ember Spirit cannot remnant out, he will usually die. Also, offensive dispels can be very troublesome early on, like from an Oracle for example, because the Flame Guard can be dispelled, and if we max the Flame Guard, we might be in a lot of trouble when we get hit by a dispel. Another big downside is that since we do not have sustained damage output, so we are really bad at auto-attacking stuff, we cannot do Roshan. Natural hard counters of the hero is Huskar. So if you have to play a Huskar in your pubs, you can probably just straight up go or a Flame Guard build, just push out the wave and hit jungle creeps, because there's most likely nothing you can do. Another problematic hero for Ember Spirit is Oracle. Oracle has a root which disables all our movement capabilities. He can offensively dispel our Flame Guard, and he can even dispel his teammates out of the roots if necessary. He has pure magic immunity that he can buff to himself or his teammates to basically make all the magic damage components of Ember Spirit useless during mid game and early late game scenarios when the physical damage is not so high. And he can also just ultimate players that we want to burst down with our Remnant Bomb. So Oracle is pretty much a hard counter for Ember Spirit. A carry hero that counters Ember Spirit really well would be Troll. Troll Warlord is basically a bane to deal with. Troll has built-in root, and at some point when the attack speed of the Troll is high enough, he can permanently root the Ember Spirit, so he cannot get away, and it is impossible for the Ember Spirit to man fight the Troll, because the DPS output of the Troll is so much higher that we can never auto-attack him, basically. Also, even if we try to burst the Troll, he could simply press his ulti while we travel through the remnants to the location and survive the burst damage. And potentially, if we try to play sneaky and just try to root him and play around that, he can also simply just press ulti and start training us, because the Troll ultimate will apply a dispel. The first hero on the list is Death Prophet. Death Prophet is a highly contested pick in the competitive scene at the moment, because if you get hard countered by a last pick Broodmother for example, or a Lycan, you can simply swap it to the safe lane or even the off lane if the matchup is good. So generally speaking, for those currently strong picks, there are counters for sure, but try to communicate with your team generally speaking and ask them for a lane swap if you think another hero is more fit to play the mid lane and you simply swap the hero to the side lane. So the skill build of Death Prophet is usually 402 into a 404. So you max out the Crypt Swarm and put 2 points in the Leech first. A more aggressive variant is a 4-1-3 basically, where you take the silence at some point if you have gank potential from a position for Earth Spirit for example, or a Tusk that can rotate in. And you also can think about putting an early point into silence if you want to catch elusive heroes, like in this game, it's really strong versus the PL and also to cancel channeling spells. So in this game we see the Pugna and we need the silence to cancel the life drain. The item build is pretty straightforward, so you usually have a magic wand into face boots, but you will often see that people also buy threads because threads synergize really well with a Ganem Scepter and are basically better for farming as well as tanking magic damage, because you can simply switch the threads to Strength if you are scared to be bursted down by magic damage. After that we usually see a Yule Scepter in most cases because it's really good for setting up our silence, and also we can Yules ourselves and keep life draining targets. So we life drain, Yule ourselves, and if people want to kill us and they stand around the Yules, we continue to leech life from them. A very common approach after the Yules is the Blink Dagger. Blink Dagger basically allows us to cast our ultimate and blink into the enemy team. This is in particular strong if you have a defensive support in the backline like a Winter Wyvern or an Oracle, so you can go really deep. But please be careful if you don't have defensive supports in your game, because Death Prophet, generally speaking, is very squishy, so if you go for these deep blink-ins in team fights, you might get punished really hard. In most cases we see either a Ganem Scepter, Shiva or BKB after the Blink Dagger. In most cases it's a BKB, so we can simply train through the team fights with our ultimate. But if we don't need the BKB in particular, you can go for something like Shiva's or Ganem Scepter. And I think a Ganem Scepter is basically the middle ground between BKB and Shiva, so you're not as susceptible against magic damage as usual because of the higher base HP pool, and the Shivas against physical damage. And basically Ganem Scepters and Shivas give us also a little bit of offensive potential, and BKB is purely defensive. The friends are basically defensive supports and other heroes that provide push, as well as heroes that can either lock down targets or gap close so we can connect with our ultimate. So if we take a look into this game, we have a defensive support, we have a Chen to also support the push and tank a little bit for us when we siege buildings, and we have the Centaur that can just press gap close and initiate later on for us with a Blink Dagger. The strength of the hero is basically sustained leech versus cores that can't really burst you down. So as long as there is no magic damage, you can, like heavy magic damage, you can simply leech health from multiple heroes. That makes you basically very tanky. So we also have a pretty good scaling versus strength heroes because we leech percentage based damage, and we have a very strong pushing ultimate. Also, the ultimate can be used to take Roshan down, so we can simply walk into the Rosh pit at some point with the entire team, pop the ulti and just bring down Roshan. Also, the landing stage is pretty decent versus most of the heroes that are played in mid lane, and it's also decent against a few cheese picks. Late game scaling is also an important fact because there is unlimited late game scaling on Death Prophet in my opinion, because we have access to Octarine Core and Refresher Orb at some point, and we can pair it with a double BKB for example, or a double Hex, double Shivas, and we can also utilize the Refresher Shard on the third Roshan really well. The weakness of the hero is that it can get bursted down easily and that it's basically very squishy. We don't have the best strength gain on the hero, we have very low armor because we don't gain a lot of agility either. Another problem is that the hero is ultimate based, so without your ultimate you're basically no hero. It is also very weak if you want to pick off players, especially after they completed their defensive items. So in this game we are basically on a timer if you want to kill the Phantom Lancer, because at some point he will gain access to a Manta style or a BKB, he will dispel the silence and just doppelganger out. So death profit during later stages in the game is super bad at ganking players. Also, we require a lot of items to keep us alive, especially if we don't have a defensive support in the game. So we are pretty item dependent. Natural hard counters for death profit are Brood Mother. If we get basically last pick Brood Mothered, we cannot play this lane. I think then we just have to ask for a lane swap. A good carry hero against death profit is Anti-Mage. We basically cannot catch him. He's a natural Manta style carrier, so he can dispel the silence at some point and he will blow us up because the mana costs of all the spells on death profit, they are really high. So if we pull off an entire combo, we basically lose half of our mana pool around the 18-minute mark, as we can see in this game, and Anti-Mage could potentially just blow you up with a mana void. For supports, you need to look out for burst heavy supports like Skyrev and Lion, or even a Shadow Demon. A Shadow Demon is probably one of the worst things to deal with because he can dispel your Eul's Scepter and removes your HP if he hits the cursed, and you will simply get bursted down immediately. Let's talk about the bane of many mid lane players, Razor. So Razor is usually skilled in a 2-2-0, and then you will follow up with 4-2-0, so you max plasma field. But you can also opt for 2-4-0, depending if the enemy can break the static link effectively. If you prioritize pushing out waves and jungling, you usually want to opt for a plasma field build instead. Usual item route is power threads to be very tanky, a magic wand, then you go into Eul's. Eul's is important to catch players as well as cancel TPs, because players can just TP out if you catch them solo and you need the Eul's to break it. As well as you can just leech players while they're Eul'd with the static link. Usually it is followed up by a BKB, because we basically just want to run at players as effective as possible, and BKB allows us to do that. I would only skip BKB if you're like 100% sure that the defensive support can save you. The friends of Razor are basically heroes that provide any form of lockdown or slows, so crowd control on friendly heroes is really useful, so we can play around more efficient with our link. Pushing heroes are, in my opinion, also really strong in combination with Razor, because Razor is a mid-game to early-late game oriented hero, which can be very strong through mid-game by tanking and dealing with enemy cores, especially with the physical cores. So if you pair it with a push-heavy hero that can basically sit behind the Razor, you can easily siege objectives and force fights around these objectives. Another strength of Razor is basically its strong early and mid game, because Razor counters most of the melee matchups that are played right now. So it's really good versus Monkey King, it's really strong versus Void Spirit and Ember Spirit. If they try to come close to you, you can simply start linking them. Another interesting thing is that it also counters single core physical lineups. So in this particular game we see that Virtus Pro Prodigy only has one physical core in form of the Monkey King. So if you pick Razor against these lineups, you're in a really strong position heading into the late game, because all the Razor has to do is press link onto the physical core and he loses all its damage. So team fighting after the damage is drained is very easy. The last thing is that we can buy an Aghanim Scepter at some point if needed. So Aghanim Scepter will allow our ultimate to hit buildings. So we have a way to break high ground if necessary. The weakness of the hero is that it's very susceptible to mobile heroes. So we basically never wanna play Razor into mobile heroes. It's also pretty susceptible to magic burst like a Death Prophet, because we don't have the best strength gain, and basically we just try to stack as many defensive items as possible so we don't get bursted down and can utilize our static link as well as our ultimate. Razor itself is bad at bringing down buildings because the hero doesn't do a lot of damage, it has a very low agility gain, and we usually don't buy heavy damage items. So bringing down buildings with the Razor itself is really bad, but we can offset that by building a Ganem Scepter. Another problem is that we cannot do Roche. We cannot static link Roche, and we don't have a high damage per second on the hero, because the only time we actually do damage is after we linked someone and soaked his damage away. So doing Roshan with Razor is pretty hard, if not impossible. Natural counters for Razor are basically super elusive heroes, as well as heroes that can stop us from going in. A carry example would be Weaver. Weaver is like super elusive, very fast, he can break Link, and if he starts to man fight us, he can simply time-lapse out at some point. So Weaver is basically a nightmare to deal with for a Razor. For mid lane, I think Queen of Pain is one of the most annoying heroes to deal with, and I would consider it a hard counter. So Queen of Pain can basically just harass us down during the landing stage, and if we try to link her, she can simply blink away to break the link. And also during mid game and early late game scenarios, when Razor is the strongest, Queen of Pain has a very strong burst output in form of the Sonic Wave as well as the Scream of Pain. So she can basically just burst us. For supports, I think Shadow Demon is one of the strongest heroes against Razor, because he has multiple ways of slowing the Razor down as well as aggressively dispelling his Eul's Scepter once the Razor picks up the Eul's Scepter. So there's two ways he can play against us. He can simply banish us before we have a BKB, and the heroes we chase with the static link will simply walk away. And if they find the initiation or the Shadow Demon is in a position where he can actually apply his curse to the Razor, he removes a lot of our HP, and we are not the most tanky hero, so it's very easy to burst the Razor down with a Shadow Demon. And if anything happens, he can simply just press ultimate on us, even if we have a BKB on the Razor, and the Shadow Demon ultimate will apply a BKB piercing slow, so even if we have BKB, people can simply walk away. That's it for the meta report on the mid lane. I hope you got a little bit of insight about the current meta, and if you want to try out these heroes, I think they're very strong, especially in pubs. Because they're not that susceptible to cheese heroes, and in most cases they provide a very stable lane for you. So my name is GamerzClass and thanks for watching.